Coming up on Dialogue Weekend, U.S. President Donald Trump has signed the Taipei Act into law. What influence will it have in the cross-strait relationship? In Japan, the 2020 Summer Olympics have been postponed. How will the world's biggest sporting event be affected? And this week's newsmaker. Now on Dialogue Weekend.
Welcome to this edition of Dialogue Weekend. I'm Xu Qingduo. China has expressed strong opposition to the Taipei Act signed into law by U.S. President Donald Trump, saying the bill severely violates the One China principle and the three China-U.S. joint communiques. The U.S. legislation represents Washington's latest support for Taiwan over its international status. In 2019, the U.S. passed similar bills to enhance ties with Taiwan, creating more tension between China and the United States. Today, we'll take a closer look at the potential impact of the bill on cross-strait relations as well as ties between Beijing and Washington. I'm joined via satellite by Dr. Xue Chen, Research Fellow from Shanghai Institute for International Studies, and via Skype by Rick Denham, Visiting Scholar at Tsinghua University. Welcome to our show, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, Rick, what is the Taipei Act all about? Why the U.S. is passing such a bill? Why it is making such a legislation now?
Well, this bill was passed unanimously by the U.S. House of Representatives early in March. It was negotiated with the Senate and signed by President Trump. It's both symbolic and practical. Symbolically, it is saying that Taipei should be that global relations with Taipei should not be limited, and practically it commits the U.S. government to working in every international organization that allows observer status to have Taiwan admitted the same way as Palestinians. There's no Palestinian state, but Palestine is allowed to be an observer in many international organizations. So this law would require U.S. agencies to seek Taiwan to be admitted to anything, any international organization short of nationhood. It does not say that Taiwan is an independent nation, but it says it deserves observer status.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Xue Chen, there are, of course, other U.S. politicians talking about even supporting Taiwan to be present in the UN, of course, which is probably more important than other international organizations. So how will the U.S. support Taiwan's international status from your point of view, from the Chinese side?
Actually, it's a kind of a series of legislatures made by the full House of the Congress from the 2016 until the 2019. There's a series of the legislature made by the U.S. Congress. But for the support of Taiwan for the international organization participation, either for the membership or the observer status, it's a totally new development. And also, it is quite iterated very clearly that the United States supports Taiwan for participation of international organizations without the requirement of statehood. But on the other hand, which means there's a kind of a consensus reached between U.S. and China in the last 4 decades, now has been terminated. Mm-hmm. So we are now sailing into an unknown sea with this termination of the consensus between the United States and China being reached since the establishment of the relationship between the U.S. and China. What will be the outcome and the consequences of this kind of a series of legislature made by the U.S. Congress? It is still yet to know.
Well, Xue Chen, you mentioned about the consensus over the past 40 years between Beijing and Washington. Basically, that can be described as the One China principle and the three joint communique between China and the United States. That served as the cornerstone, the foundation between the two countries in terms of their relationship. So brief us about, in particular for our viewers who are not familiar with this particular relationship or One China principle, tell us how important it is, the Taiwan issue, to China.
Actually, with the long history of, especially in the latest 100 more years, the foreign invasion and also the cessation of the part of the China. For example, in the 1931, there was a cessation of Northeast China, and the Japanese supported the puppet regime called Manchukuo. With the cessation of Northeast China out of China itself. So China has a very strong and fresh memory about the cessation. It's also a very substantial kind of a fear that in this future, this kind of a cessation will recur again with the support of the United States. So the Chinese legislatures has also passed the anti-cessation law in 2005. So with this kind of, confrontation between the two legislatures, so we don't know what kind of consequences with this U.S. support for the international status of Taiwan by this termination of the consensus they reached 40 years ago, and also comply with the two governments in the last 4 decades.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rick, after hearing from the views from the Chinese side, obviously Taiwan issue is critical to the territorial integrity of China, national sovereignty to China. Well, the U.S. is not calling for a complete independence of Taiwan, but obviously this is a substantial step to support Taiwan to increase its presence in international arena. So what's your response to that? If the U.S. is not supporting, okay, Taiwan independence, but at the same time, they are doing something obviously damaging this one China principle.
I agree with you. This is a significant pivot, and it is a significant action on the part of President Trump and the United States Congress. The United States, ever since Richard Nixon decided in the 1970s to embrace the one China concept, the United States has been, at least on record, in favor of it. But Henry Kissinger had a strategy. It's really been the strategy of the U.S. for 40 years, which is strategic ambiguity. It means that they say one China, but don't do anything to Taiwan. Let Taiwan act autonomously. The problem has been in the last 4 years since the election and then the landslide re-election of Taiwan's leader, where she is very strongly in favor of, if not outright independence, complete autonomy. And the United States government over the last few years, since the beginning of the Trump administration, has become more strongly aligned with her. I think that the issues of the WHO and coronavirus really set off the U.S. Congress here, where Taiwan was not given information, or at least it claims it was not given information by China or by the WHO after the outbreak in Wuhan, and does not have observer status in the WHO. I think that was, as they would say in the United States, the straw that broke the camel's back with the U.S. Congress. But I think that Donald Trump overall is trying to be provocative on almost every single one of the sensitive issues that the Chinese government is very sensitive about, including Tibet and including Xinjiang, where there are acts before Congress that will definitely cause the Chinese government to react with fury.
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of the WHO, in terms of the coronavirus, obviously, previously Taiwan was observer to WHO under the previous administration of Ma Ying-jeou, when there was a better relationship between the mainland and Taiwan. But of course, after the election victory of the current administration, which is the pro-independence of Taiwan, so basically there was absence of this observer status over there. But still, the Chinese side, the mainland side, basically notified Taiwan, the health department, about the outbreak of the coronavirus, sharing with them data and the information with them. But Xue Chen, with the passage of this act, how do you think the status quo across Taiwan Strait will be impacted? So is there a possibility that the Taiwan's leading party, the ruling party, DPP, may be emboldened? Maybe they will do something to challenge Beijing and thus bring this relationship into the dangerous terrain?
Definitely. The Taiwanese authority has already expressed the sincere, welcome and thanks for this passing of the legislation, passing of this bill to be the public law. And the timing is very unfortunate. This full House bill has been, drafted actually in later last year. But right now, with this signature of this bill to be the public law, is still under a kind of a coronavirus pandemic. So this timing is very unfortunate. And also for the Taiwanese authority, they might, borrow the American power to serve for their own interests. So on one hand, the United States is looking at that, reduce the military presence cost in Asia Pacific. But on the other hand, their legislation is supporting the U.S. presence to pay more, import more resources into this region for a possible confrontation, not only diplomatically, but also might be in other arenas. So the Taiwan tail, at the end of the day, might wag the American dog. So it's really people are uncertain about the future of the cross-Strait relationship and also the relationship between the U.S. and China. As I said, that we are sailing into the unknown sea, and also the fear and uncertainty can unleash a so-called aggressive impulses. This will be a very unfortunate downward spiral in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's move on to Japan. The Olympic Games in Tokyo will be postponed until 2021. The decision comes as the tolls of coronavirus are growing around the world, and it's increasingly unlikely for countries to send a team to compete. There are ramifications of the rescheduling, as well as huge economic cost for Japan, the hosting country. For that, I'm joined via satellite by Dr. Patrick Rich, Director of the Sports Business Program at Washington University in St. Louis, and our correspondent in Tokyo, Grace Lee. Well, Grace, the cancellation of the Olympics is no easy decision, but it's not unprecedented, right?
No, well, it is unprecedented for peacetime, and it is obviously a very big decision for the IOC and for Japan to go ahead with this because, this is a huge revenue stream for Japan during a time when, they've had a very big hit in their tourism industry. Coronavirus has not helped with that at all. It's at the brink of recession now, and a lot of businesses here have been telling me that they were relying on the Olympics to help them up on their feet, and now that it's been postponed, they're desperately trying to find new measures to kind of tie them up until next year when they'll be able to see some kind of revenue stream again. So this is, it wasn't completely unpredictable, seeing that, how the coronavirus situation has panned out around the world. A lot of the public here in Japan had been expecting perhaps the Olympics would be postponed, but I think the news did come as a shock for many here.
Well, as you said, of course, in peacetime, this is the first time that the Olympic Games were postponed for a long time, as long as a year. But for everyone involved, the organizers, participants, athletes, sponsors, and audience. So what do you think of this one-year delay will mean for them?
Well, it's going to be a massive headache for the organizers, especially trying to find a window next year, sometime before the end of the summer. They're trying to find a time that would work for all these different organizations and federations, because the Olympics is a marriage of, several different sports, and each of those sports are governed by different federations, and those federations have their own schedule. They need to find a window that would work for all these different athletes who, have their own commitments and show times and big events that they have to attend to. So that's going to be a massive headache for these organizers. The other part, of course, is the TV schedule. NBC, the U.S. network, committed billions of dollars to get the rights for the Olympics. Now they have to figure out a way to air this next year instead of this year. And of course, there's also the issue of the Olympics grounds that have been built here. They're trying to figure out whether or not the Olympic Village here might be good for, hosting patients for the coronavirus. That's something that officials have mentioned, so that might be some good use of it. But of course, I'm mentioning a lot of different things because there are just so many moving parts that the IOC and Japan's government now have to figure out.
Well, previously Japan was insisting on a complete hosting of the games, meaning, starting on time and with spectators in attendance. So how difficult is it for Japan, on the Japanese side, to make the decision? You mentioned about, of course, NBC and the organizers.
Yeah, for Japan, like I mentioned, they really were relying on this to be a major boost to the economy, because tourism numbers have been faltering a little bit. Now with coronavirus, this is definitely going to hurl them into a recession. But all in all, this is still better than cancellation for Japan. That was kind of their main concern going into this. If this was canceled, this would have taken a massive hit in their GDP. Some estimates showed about 1.4%. Now, this might be a $10 billion loss. There's a wide range of estimates at this time, but, this is not as bad as cancellation, according to several economists. So that is kind of what will keep them going for now. But Prime Minister Shinzo Abe tonight said that they are going to come up with an economic package to try and help tie companies over for the next couple of months. And we're seeing a rise of coronavirus cases now here in Tokyo. So it looks like several roads leading to Tokyo will be shut down. We're seeing another rise in cases in Osaka. So a lot of these venues where we were going to host Olympics are, under tight watch now because of the virus. So it seems that the situation overall here in Japan is not getting better, and that's another massive headache for the government.
So in terms of the economic cost, not only the cancellation, the postponement of this event, but also the increasing number of coronavirus patients over there. So the package being prepared by the government, Japanese government, so I guess it will be really big, right?
Yeah, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has called it, an unprecedented package to try and help boost the economy. They have announced a couple different packages in the past 2 months or so to try and help businesses here. But, like everywhere else in the world, coronavirus has already hit Japan very hard, seeing its business ties with China and its ties with the U.S. So obviously, those areas being impacted has hit Japan hard as well. I've spoken to several business owners who say, Japan's Olympics may be next year, but, maybe my business won't survive until then. So that's another massive issue that Japan's government has to face now. And, the one good thing, I guess, is that Japan's Tokyo 2020 will remain Tokyo 2020. They've said that the branding of the Olympic Games will remain Tokyo 2020, and that'll hopefully help some businesses who have already made a lot of commitments to issuing out Tokyo 2020 merchandise and marketing it as such.
Well, from an athletic perspective, what issues come up in terms of their qualification, in terms of their age, even for the individual participants, fairness and other competitions, and fairness among athletes?
Yeah, of course. Well, the IOC has already said that athletes who have already qualified for the Olympics will remain qualified for 2021, so they'll be able to participate next year. But a lot of the qualifying events had been canceled in the wake of the coronavirus outbreak, so only about 57% of the slots for the Olympics had been taken at this point, and now with the postponement, it's not clear when we'll be able to see those qualifying matches resume. And so that's, that throws a huge wrench in training plans for a lot of these athletes, but also the fact that a lot of these massive regions are under lockdown is a massive issue as well.
Well, we have Patrick here. Does this move, I mean, the ramification, simply mean new year, new event, Patrick?
Well, there's so many tentacles to this whole situation. I mean, you talk about the cash flow, where a lot of these Olympic sports bodies across the world were expecting an infusion of money this year that they're not going to see. You talk about the sponsors that had, of course, NBC had 17 days of programming that were lined up. Now what are they going to do? And they had received $1.25 billion from various advertisers. How are they going to make good between now and next year? You mentioned the timing issue. Here in St. Louis, we were supposed to host the U.S. Olympic trials for gymnastics, and we can't reschedule that. I have no doubt we will get those back next spring or summer, but we can't schedule it until we know when the games are going to be. So the tentacles are just ever-reaching.
Well, according to many public health experts, it is possible that the COVID-19 could go into 2021, and we don't know exactly when this crisis will be over. So what are the criteria in terms of conditions for the Olympic, going ahead safely and successfully next year? Patrick.
Well, that's a great question, and I wish I was a medical expert. I wish I could answer that question. But what I will say is this, that obviously, just like the American leagues are doing with respect to the National Basketball Association, the National Hockey League, Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, they're listening to the CDC, and I think globally, the IOC is going to have to look at all of what's going on across the world to gauge what's going to be, safe for all of the athletes and fans. But think about this. The ticket issue, you raise a great point, is now that, this was one of the highest demanded Olympics where there was roughly 8 million tickets that were going to be sold for this event. So now what's going to happen? Are you going to have people that are going to ask for refunds because they don't want to risk it for next year? Some people may not be able to go next summer just for other reasons. So just the logistics of not only the ticket situation, but also the cancellations of hotels and airfares. What a logistical nightmare this is all presented.
Well, the Tokyo 2020, as we mentioned, the brand will remain the same. Probably that's a good thing. But looking ahead, for example, for the next Olympic Games, so 3 years from next year, we will continue to follow this 4 years interval.
Absolutely. They're not going to interrupt the flow. So even if the games, or hopefully the games happen next summer, they'll still have the next set of games in Paris in 24. So that's one of the benefits of having 4-year gap between summer games. And it won't have any impact on the Winter Olympics as well. One other thing to mention that I don't know if it was brought up earlier is you certainly feel for the Japanese taxpayers. This is a games that when they made the bid in 2013, they said it was going to cost about $7.5 billion. Well, they are already at somewhere between $12.5 and $20 billion, and because of this delay, for various reasons, the projections are this is going to add another $3 to $6 billion, with a B, $6 billion to the final cost of these games because you've got to renegotiate leases. The Athlete Village, and this is amazing, the Athlete Village, that was supposed to be leased out as apartments. Well, they can't do that now. So they have to wait until the games actually take place before they can actually see that through. So a lot of logistical nightmares.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick and Grace. Well, let's leave it there for now and take a look at this week's Newsmaker.
我觉得我也是很平凡、很普通的一个人。像我们这样的人，就是默默奉献出自己的一点力量嘛，能帮助更多的人。我觉得这才是我最大的开心的地方。
Well, Gao Zhihao's story is covered by the Time magazine, and his image appears on the cover. Here is a quote of the comment from the Time magazine. Since the outbreak erupted in China, Gao Zhihao, a 32-year-old delivery driver living in Beijing, has had to take a health test and spend 20 minutes disinfecting his motorcycle and clothes every day before setting off on his route. Without drivers like Gao, who works for delivery giant Meituan to bring goods to their homes, families would go hungry, and the sick wouldn't get vital supplies. Luckily, Gao has not contracted COVID-19, but he puts his health at risk every day. So, Rick, how do you view the message? How do you view the comment of the Chinese delivery rider Gao Zhihao by the Time magazine?
I think these are the brave people of the coronavirus pandemic. I see that in the United States right now. I mean, the delivery people are essential to the health of the nations and to the economies of the nations, continuing when so many people are not working, when so many people are at home. I mean, they are, along with the healthcare workers and the security people, the police, the fire people, the local authorities who are trying to keep the situation under control. They're risking their health every day, and I think that people appreciate that all over the world, and I think people in the United States really appreciate what has been done in China by so many of these people, and they are role models for Americans. In America, it's Amazon or the United States Postal Service doing this, and I think that people look to the Chinese delivery drivers for inspiration.
Mm-hmm. Well, Xu Chen, you know, during this COVID-19 pandemic here in China, it was not just Gao Zhihao, but I would say millions probably of delivery riders like Gao who kept working despite the risk of getting infected. I guess, you know, almost every individual Chinese during this time received the service from a rider like Gao Zhihao. What's your experience? What's your thought on that?
In Chinese, we call them as so-called upriver watermen. They are not going down the current, but going upriver. And also, I believe the ordinary people like me, a lot of people, Chinese people, owe the gratitude for the people like Gao Zhixiao. And also, I really think that the camera points to those crossroads contributes to fighting the coronavirus pandemic. All the people, including me, owe the gratitude to the people like Gao Zhixiao. And remind me two things. First one, this human spirits, and also the people like Gao Zhixiao would like to, help the people to overcome the difficulties, daily life difficulties, really help the people to fight the pandemic. And also this kind of desire for a better life in the big cities, for the families would like to change their life trajectory in the smaller towns or the countryside, and for the future generation, the children, for better educations. That's the the root call to attract the Fortune 500 to invest continuously in China.
Obviously,
secondly,
don't underestimate
the Chinese, the resilience of the Chinese
delivery
economy.
person like Gao.
Yeah.
Well, with that, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks to Rick Danham from Tsinghua University and Xue Chen from Shanghai Institute for International Studies, and Patrick Rich from Washington University in St. Louis, and Grace Lee, CGTN correspondent. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. You can find me on Twitter, Xu Qinduo. Thank you for watching. See you next time.